Monica here. Welcome to the podcast for nerds, where we get to talk to some amazing professionals and ask them all about how they use data to solve the world's problems, highlighting some careers data related that you might not have thought about before. Plus, of course, we include some fun bits because we're all nerds here and we love to have fun. So with us today, we have Tristan Keelan. How are you, Tristan?
Doing good. Thanks, Monica. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being on the show with us. We kind of start off all of our shows by understanding people's origin stories, kind of like a superhero nerdy theme, right? So if you could, please tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are today in your career.
Yeah, sure. So I took probably an alternative path to data in that I was a English literature major in college with aspirations to be the next great American novelist, journalist, what have you. And ultimately, what that meant was I was a storyteller, and that was kind of what I like to do with words, tell stories, effective communication. So my early work was in politics, in memo writing, drafting legislation. I did RFP response writing for a commercial bank. So really just sort of trying to be persuasive with writing through storytelling. Eventually, I ended up working in the technology sector for an EHR company in the behavioral health and human services space. And it was really there that I realized what we were selling in software, as many people are, is the collection of data. And so in order to be able to tell those stories, I had to learn about what the data was we were collecting, how we were pushing it out, what people were going to do with it. And so without even realizing it, over the course of about 4 or 5 years, I was learning a lot about databases and dashboard displays. And I had to, in order to talk the talk with my customers and understand what it was they were doing and what it was they needed. So while that's happening, right, simultaneously, I have to do my own reporting, right, on my marketing, stuff and sales support stuff. And so I was introduced to this tool that everybody knows now is Microsoft's Power BI. And it was early on, maybe 2014, 2015, something like that. And I'm like, oh, this is great. But I assumed it was something I couldn't use. It was something that other people were going to do for me, because I just never saw myself as a data person, right? I assumed, nope, I'm on the language arts side. There's other people who do that, and it's not me. But when I had to report for my own work, I realized maybe this is a tool that I could use. And so I found my way through Power BI with sales and marketing data, which I understood. And that's really how I learned the tool, so that I could take the learned application of the tool, and now I could apply it to other data. Then it was about learning the data sets, right? Because I knew how to use the tool. So eventually that led me into the behavioral health industry, where I put those skills to use in writing data, making reports, and then running quality improvement process. So really for me, it was about getting into data so I could get back out of it and into, telling stories with the data and creating process improvement with it, which is really now what I do now, is help connect other behavioral health, human services, social care agencies with my organization, CCNY, who have a lot of people way smarter at this stuff than I ever was, to connect them so that we can help those agencies tell their story and improve their outcomes for their clients.
So what exactly is your title right now in your main roles and responsibilities?
Sure. So I'm the director of business development for CCNY. So I'm looking out for, like I said, behavioral health, mental health, substance use recovery agencies social care agencies, foster care type programs, really those sort of pieces of healthcare that are not big hospital systems, right? They're sort of smaller community providers that often can't afford their own infrastructure for data analysts and big tools and stuff. So we're able to come in and help them solve their data problems. And they're all unique and they're all good at have certain parts of their data all figured out and certain parts they need help with. It could be technical, it could be cultural. A lot of places need help embracing data. They're like, we have it, but we don't understand how to get people to, use it, read, react, get into a culture of continuous quality improvement. So we provide, a whole bunch of service offerings depending on, where those groups are in that continuum.
Okay. And you mentioned a little bit already about solving problems. What types of problems are you solving with that behavioral data?
Yeah. So, just a quick, snapshot of what the data picture looks like in behavioral healthcare. It's largely represents people, which is both wonderful, but also scary in the sense that that's a responsibility that you have to take very seriously. If you're short on widgets, you're short on widgets. If your people counts are off, you're not including whole heartbeats that are walking around doing stuff, right? So we believe that, when we work with the data sets that we do, that the stakes are pretty high to get it right, to measure twice and cut once and whatever cliche you want to put against it. But so, clients who go to a behavioral health agency for some sort of counseling, there's, patient data that doesn't change very often, right? Like your name, your address, your social security numbers, you might have a diagnosis, who's your health insurance carrier. So there's kind of that, person owned set of information. And then they go through what we call in the data side episode of care. So you begin counseling and you're in counseling for a certain number of time until you're no longer in counseling. And so there's certain people with certain needs where they might always be in an episode of care, or maybe you need counseling for 6 months and you go back, but then maybe another event happens in your life where you come back to counseling and you would have a brand new episode of care that has a start date and an end date. And then between those episodes of care, there's activities, things that happen, the sessions that you show up for, medications you might be prescribed, assessments, things that people might be doing. So just having that as like a general, I'm sure your audience is starting to build data models in their head and draw relational relationships. And that's exactly, what it takes to make the numbers work. But there's a method of delivering services, and they're known as evidence-based practices. And that means that some sort of intervention or way of treating a client has been studied at a research level, proven effective, and then sort of published for people to use. Like, okay, if I have a client that presents this way, if I treat them in this way, they're likely, because of research, to have a positive outcome on the other side. So in order to do that, you have to execute with what, we know as fidelity to the model. You can't just say you're doing an evidence-based practice. You have to actually do it. And that will include anything from, these activities should be done in this order, or these activities should be done with a certain amount of time in between them, no more or no less. Or if you're outside of, call it like a prescription. And if your delivery has multifaceted things that have to happen on time, in order, with a certain level of expert delivery, then you have to measure if you're adhering to that. So it can start with something as simple as, if a client comes for expresses interest in seeing a therapist for whatever reason, a lot of standards say it should only take a certain amount of time before that client sees an individual face to face. Okay. Right? it's sort of one of the hardest ones to talk about, but think about a crisis situation or like suicidal ideation. If somebody called a counseling office and said, I'm having suicidal ideation, and they said, that's no problem, we'll see you sometime next week. Well, so much can happen in a week. The sooner you get a client in, the sooner you can, start to help them. And like I said, with the people involved here, like there's a lot at stake in terms of people's mental health, their overall well-being. So the data that we work with our clients to support does two things. One, it does that storytelling part, right? Here's how well you're doing. Here's how many people you've helped. Here's the degree to which you've helped them. Are they X amount better on some pre and post scale? Or in the case of, foster youth, have they been returned to their biological family or not? Or have they been successfully adopted to their foster family, or some sort of permanency around that is an example. Another example, like I mentioned, would be, are you seeing clients who need help in a timely enough way to prevent them from self-harm? So, the data that our clients want to look at is both that long range storytelling, semi-promotional piece, right? If they're pursuing funding from foundations or things like that, but also that day-to-day operational piece of, based on my data, here's what I have to do next. This group of clients needs this thing next, and they need it timely. So you can help sort of guide that clinical process against what is an effective map.
Mm-hmm. There's so many things running through my head right now because I have a background in security. So I'm hearing like PII and wondering what kind of different procedures that you guys have to adhere to. Sure. Being health, HIPAA is probably involved in all of that. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I do want to ask is, how do you collect the data that you're collecting? Because it sounds like a lot of manual processes and inputting data into a database. Is that correct?
So the most common is through an electronic health record. So when a client comes in, those agencies are going to, enroll them in their system and sort of use that system to document the activity. And then that system, right, is meant to back-end that data in ways that it could be, spit back out, whether it's in a raw form or an aggregate or organized form. Now, what's interesting for us in what we provide is a lot of human service agencies, for plenty of reasons that is nobody's fault, can't really get to a single health record platform. Mm-hmm. So if you're providing any services on behalf of a state, the state likely, like a foster care program, the state likely said, here's our system for you to use, and you have to use it because we're the state and we need to know what's happening with youth in that system. Mm-hmm. But then your outpatient mental health clinic has to have a system that can bill insurance. So you've got that one over here. Maybe you're running a behavioral alternative school. Well, then you need a system that organizes curriculum and grades and all of that. So if you think about that, as agencies have success and they grow and they start these different programs, unfortunately, they tend to accumulate systems as well. Yeah. And so what that does for administrators, like executives, people who want to drive quality improvement, is they can't see what's happening across the agency because it's siloed in different systems. So we do a lot of our work is to pull raw data out of all those systems and then throw it into a place, a lake or warehouse or whatever terminology you want to use, and create that reporting platform that can say, here's how we're doing for an individual, not here's how we're doing in a program, because ultimately it comes down to those people. And almost always there are clients who are in the system for this service and this system for this service, and they don't have a way to know that those are the same people in data terms, and it creates a lot of barriers. So So before we even talk about measures and reports and outputs, a lot of our clients need a lot of work on it's the unsexy stuff that you can't see, right? That this audience loves. It's queries, it's unique identifiers, it's fuzzy connections, it's all those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's the stuff that I really love, and exactly where my head was going. I was like, well, I know that these systems aren't talking to each other because of the security reasons. And how do you then create these reports that give those insights? And there just must be, I mean, what's the Pareto effect, the 80-20 rule, right? It's probably like 99 to
yeah, right.
That doesn't equal 100, I know, but
absolutely.
Yes. Oh goodness. So there's a lot of fun there, right? On the cleaning and modeling side.
Yep.
I can assume.
Absolutely.
Awesome. But you specifically are not in that world. You're more the quality improvement side of stuff.
Yeah. So ultimately, my agency does that kind of work. My specific role is to help those agencies understand that their problem is solvable, because a lot of them are going along and they're just, these people have a lot of work and they're providing care for a lot of people. And it's hard to find the time to step out and think big picture. So I'm able to show them, look, you're spending all this time every month, every quarter, or whatever, all roads lead through Excel is kind of what happens, right? And nothing against Excel, but it's a lot of, exports and manual manipulations and, a couple of, a bunch of hours spread out over a bunch of weeks, spread out over a bunch of people is what it takes every month to get new data. And, where I get really excited is the concept, I don't know if there's a standard term for it, but I call it the time to report.
Okay.
If it takes a certain amount of time to get to your report, and that time is significant, and you have other jobs to do, right? These aren't data scientists. It's a data scientist job to spend that time, right?
Yeah.
And so we look for automation opportunities. We look for consolidation opportunities. We'll write our scripts. We'll write, query schedules, like anything that can run without manual intervention. Because when you spend a ton of time making your report, God bless people, but the last thing anybody wants to do is read and react to that report because it's exhausting to create. And so we try to create it in a way that's replicable and automated so that our clients can show up and have their data be ready, and shift that time from how do I make my report to starting with the report and saying, now what can I do next month, quarter to make it better? Right. Okay. So ultimately we want to drive, human services towards quality improvement. And very often one of the obstacles to being able to put energy towards that is just the minimum requirement to even get the data organized and in some viewable fashion. So we're data people that do, data work. But the framework that we're driving it towards is so that experts can spend their time doing expert things to improve the data.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I think, a big part of what you do is with the storytelling part of it, right? To make sure that and convince people that your problems can be solved through this storytelling. And that is a good transition, I think, into our fun bits.
Okay.
Fun bits.
All right. I'm ready.
So with that, being a quality improvement professional, I see that you also post a lot about being a quality improvement dad.
So, yeah, actually. So I have one, I have one kid. My son is about to turn 3 years old. And so Quality Improvement Dad was created because I can't help but look for efficiencies, like and even before I understood like data, like I have a couple quirks that are born out of this. I basically refuse to wear shoes that need to be tied. And the reason is because I never leave the house or come home to the house without some stuff in both my hands. I have like backpacks, gym bags, like I'm always carrying stuff for whatever reason. So a long time ago, I decided my only footwear can come on and off without the use of my hands, because I don't want to set everything down to take my shoes off. I don't want to set everything down to put my shoes on. And so they're either tied, but like even my running shoes are slip-ons. So like it's just kind of so all right. So I've lived with like a couple of those quirks like my whole life, right? But then having kids, like the amount of things that you have to do regularly for kids, and I was surprised by it all, probably just like anybody else, but it just created this amazing pursuit of efficiency. And sometimes it's a little Sisyphus pushes the rock up the hill, but I can't like stop looking for it. So I post on LinkedIn as the Quality Improvement Dad stories about ways that I look for efficiencies in parenting and around the house and stuff. Do we want to talk about it? I could talk about a few.
I want to hear some examples. Okay,
so the first thing that I have to remind people to make this make sense is that data is not always numbers, right? Mm-hmm. So I we're also like come from an evaluative standpoint where like data can be ones and zeros, it could be math, but it could also be an interview recording, or data's information in its rawness. It can take any form, right? So I say that to say that I'm not at home spreadsheeting my life and my parenting. Like I'm not actually.
What?
Yeah, right. Which is fine. If people do that. I have no problem with that. But just so you know, when I talk about like I'm trying to improve something at home, I want to tell you like how I'm framing the measurement of it. So it'll be things like, okay, right now. We start getting ready for bed at like 7:30, right? And for a long time, when it was my turn, I'd go, we'd brush teeth, and then we'd get in bed and we'd read a couple books, and then, lights out and bedtime. And I would come back downstairs and I'd look at the clock and it'd be like 7:50. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, kids asleep, 7:50, that was great. I can watch a movie. My wife and I can watch a show. Like it's gonna be nice. And then, fast forward like a couple weeks ago, I started coming back down the stairs and it was like 8:15. And I'm like, this is taking like 45 minutes. Like what, and he's changing, right? Is what happens. So there's a lesson in like, hey, you think your data is just humming along, but the environment around your data starts changing, and you're running the same operation. You're producing the same data, but the environment is changing the context of that data. And so your output is different, right? So after a couple of times, I'm like, wait a minute, I used to get this done in 20 minutes. Now it's taking 45 minutes. What's going on? And, I'm like, so let me reassess the environment. The environment is now we're reading, now he picks the books. So he picks 5 books. I used to only pick 2, right? So, okay. We've elongated there. He used to sleep in a crib, which means he couldn't reach out of the crib. But now that he sleeps in a bed, he wants a water bottle nearby. So just before bed, he says, and where's my water bottle? Which means I got to go get the water bottle, come back out. So, so the Quality Improvement Dad, it doesn't take very many instances of this taking 45 minutes before like my whatever software my brain's running, whatever iOS I have is going alert, alert, alert. Like this is your efficiency is like blown up. You need to reassess. So, you know, we start talking about things like, okay, can you pick 2 books? And when he picks 5, we narrow it down to 2 before we start reading. Because once you start, they're in order. You have to finish them. Now I bring the water bottle up at the beginning because I know it's going to be asked for. It's like, it's just, you know, and I can proudly say that I'm moving that dial back, you know, closer to, you know, 20-25 minute bedtime routine instead of 45 minutes. But man, that's just what's happening recently. Like when they're babies and there's toys and like there's so much. And you know, anybody who's ever like tried to get a toddler dressed and out of the house knows what I'm talking about, right? So, you know, I used to, let's see, what else? I used to try to do things at the same time, right? As much as you can set something and let it happen and then work on something else at the same time, like that's good, right? That's a common efficiency. Well, if you try to get your kid ready for school while you make coffee, you're going to end up getting your kid ready for school and leaving the coffee behind or spilling it or, you know, whatever, right?
Yep.
So, you know, process change required for me. I wake up before my son. I make my coffee. I mix my cream and sugar. I stir it up. I go put it in the car.
Yes.
And then I go get him ready because that's the only way to be sure that I have found in my, you know, sort of gut analysis of how many times I left my coffee sitting in the coffee pot and gone to work without it is, you know, quality improvement dad said, if you want to make sure you have coffee, you got to do that before you can do the other thing. Same time doesn't work here. Right.
Yes.
So I don't know, like it sounds silly, but it sort of makes it fun for me to, you know, but I'm not running a business at my house or anything super crazy like that. It just makes it fun for me to analyze, you know, what I'm doing. And like, ultimately it's an analysis of how kids change you and how they, you know, force you to react to, you know, I'm an adult who hasn't changed much about myself in a long time. Right. And they're just changing, you know, week to week, month to month. And so you have to adapt to keep up. And it's not unlike what happens to us in business. Anybody who's doing the same thing today that they were 5 years ago is on their way out of business because that's just how we have to be adaptable to changing markets, changing preferences from our customers, you know, changing methodologies, I mean, I don't want to turn this into an AI episode, but like that's just starting to change the whole game for the way people are thinking about how to do things. And you know, if I could say anything about AI, it's got people who didn't usually think about, or they thought you could never find faster ways to do certain things, are reopening the conversation to, oh wow, like automating writing, like people weren't even looking for ways to automate writing. And now people are like, well, why would I ever write anything from scratch? AI writes and I edit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a wild time for data in that way.
It is. I love that quality improvement data. It really, you know, highlights that it's not just about the data, it's about the environment. So that really brings the analysis full circle and how much harder it is to analyze stuff because of the changing environment. So that's awesome. I love that. Speaking of data analysts and analyzing things, you also made a post about an acid-influenced jam band being the key to your success of being a data analyst. Can you go more into that?
Yeah, so I love that you just are asking me to tell stories because that's the fun part.
Yes.
So
we're all about stories.
It's so funny because I was not a jam band kind of person. I really wasn't. I grew up on the Seattle grunge scene and the Southern California punk rock groups, and you know you couldn't play loud enough, fast enough for me when I was growing up. And when I took that job at a human service agency to do data and quality improvement for them, there was a wonderful guy there working in our mental health clinic. And we like music, so we'd talk music. And he would tell me, the Grateful Dead's the best band out there. You really, ought to give it a try. And I thought I was never a data person. I thought I was never a Grateful Dead person. I just had like, God, talk about making assumptions. I had written that off. God, I was probably 15 when I decided I wouldn't be a Grateful Dead person, right? Like, nope, that's me. So I was driving home one day from the store, and classic rock radio station put a Grateful Dead song on. And I was like, I really like the song. And they're like, that's a hit from the Grateful Dead. And I'm like, well, wait, if I like that song, and that was the Grateful Dead, and this other guy's telling me that they're the best band around, maybe I should give them a shot. So I did. And what happened was, this was really my first job in data, where a lot of people probably already knew this about how their work was going to go. But it was a wake-up call for me, how I was going to work 8 hours a day some days and like not talk to anyone, right? Like I was going to, I was probably the best example I can remember was like the day I had to learn how to merge and append queries in Power BI, like to make something work. And man, I had to get that wrong 100 times before I got it right. And like, well, let me try this, and then go back and test it, and test it against my known numbers and see if I'm getting it right. And I'm like, wow, you really have to blow this stuff up and then put it back together in order to find out if you've done it right. And if the phone rings, if somebody opens my door, if any of those things like break my thought, the amount I'm going to have to start over, right, to retrace my steps, right, to get back in it. And it was a lot like writing for me in that way. Having your concentration broken, there's a whole period of getting back into it, which is time lost if you get disrupted. So the Grateful Dead are known for their live performances, for anybody not familiar. And they were also one of the few bands that encouraged concert goers to record their concerts.
Okay.
So this is really, really important, because where a lot of artists would make sure you had no recording equipment, right? The Grateful Dead said, by all means, come record our concert. And the reason why we're totally comfortable with that is we never play the same song the same way twice. We never play the same set list in order. Like all of our concerts are unique. That's part of our fluid. Like, a lot of bands go on a tour and they have their set list, and that's what they play every night in every city. And the Grateful Dead had a much more fluid approach to that. So what you end up with is this really huge catalog of their concerts being recorded. So instead of having 10 to 20 studio albums, there's 2,000 to 3,000 live concert recordings that are available to people to listen to. And instead of being a half an hour, 45-minute album, you can throw on a 3-4 hour concert and listen to it beginning to end. So at the same time that I'm starting to explore the Grateful Dead, at the same time I'm really starting to get comfortable with myself as a data analyst who needs this kind of work. And a 25-minute punk album that was going to end, that I was going to have to stop and find something new to listen to, was going to be broken concentration that I was starting to recognize that I couldn't afford. Okay. So putting on a 4-hour Grateful Dead concert gave me background noise with actually long instrumental things, which made me not inclined to try to be singing along and taking my concentration that way. Right. So I'm enjoying this new music. And then when it gets very jammy, it actually just sort of helps me stay in this data zone of organizing this stuff. And I go 4 hours before anything is telling me you got to go switch the album. And actually what happens with Grateful Dead concerts is once that album looped back around, it would usually be halfway through the same concert a second time before I'd realize it had even like turned over, that I was listening to songs again twice. So if you kind of like just think about that perfect storm, I had this summer where I was just building a lot of reports, and I was just finding Grateful Dead concerts to listen to supplement my work. And the next thing I knew, I woke up and I had spent like $500 on Grateful Dead concerts on my iPhone, and I'm pulling up new ones on YouTube, and I just sort of woke up one day, was like, oh my God, I'm a Deadhead. And the data aside, I'm a big fan of the music on my own. I'm going to my first quasi Grateful Dead concert this summer in July.
Oh, how exciting!
Still some of the original band members playing. So yeah, I'm really excited. My Grateful Dead journey is kind of coming full circle in the next.
That is very exciting.
Yeah. So.
That's awesome. I have to listen to things like the lo-fi hip hop, or like just colors of noise, like white noise, brown noise, pink noise is one of my favorites for studying. But that's awesome.
Nice.
So you mentioned that listening to this music really gets you in the zone for working. Mm-hmm. My question to you is, what else do you do to really like get into working or learning new things?
Yeah. Good question. I think so. The key for me when I'm learning something new is having something familiar to relate to at the start. Mm-hmm. And I think my data journey is actually a perfect way to illustrate that. And so I'd say the bulk of the like Power BI work that I've done, let's use that as the skill that I had to learn, right? Power BI is a skill. Obviously there's a lot of disciplines within it, but let's just call it that. So in order to learn Power BI, even though most of my work in it was done with behavioral health data, in order to learn it, I had to use data sets that I knew intimately, right? Mm. So when I first started the tool, I was using like Salesforce CRM data, because I understood what fields the sales reps were entering, when they were supposed to be entering them, what they meant, why, how they related to other fields that were in there. So when I did my first Salesforce data dump into Power BI, I already knew what was in there from a raw data standpoint, mm-hmm. which means I at least had gut checks on what things I should be seeing in my visuals and in my measures that I was building. So that let me learn how to do relationships, because it was all that. So then applying that tool to other data sets, I had already had the fundamentals of the tool, just had to learn how to apply it, to a new set of data. So what I tell people, anybody who's looking to learn Power BI, or even, any other, analytics tool that requires some raw data, is go to your online banking platform, export your transactions, throw them in there, and make some analysis for yourself, because you will know how the data is created. It's created when you swipe your card, on the day you swipe your card, which is the day they take your money, or it's created when you put money in your account, and you do that when you get paid, or when you deposit a check, if you're old like me, or if you do any of those who are like, what is it now, if your Venmo deposit comes in, or how all of the data is being created in your bank transaction, because you control it. So throw that into Power BI and ask yourself, what percentage of my transactions are over $20 versus under $20, or timeline track my expenses against my deposits. And if you're building with the tool, you'll know if you got it really wrong, because your gut knows what your finances are, right?
Yeah.
So that, like, when I need to learn something new, anytime I can bring existing knowledge, no matter what it is, that I can use as like that smell test or that gut check to whether I'm getting the new thing right, like that's where it's all about learning for me. Like making video, for example.
Yeah.
I like to make videos to post on LinkedIn. Well, I suck at making video, right? But so what can I bring with me? I can bring my storytelling skills, or like, I don't like being a video editor. So I bring my ability to prep a story and tell it end to end. So I don't have to edit. Boom. I make video now, but I'm not a video editor. Or, what can you bring with you into something new that you have a confidence in, so that you don't feel like you're at ground zero when you're trying to put together. Those are my tips for learning new things.
I love that so much. The bank thing, that's genius. Because you should know what transactions are going on.
Right. Well, and if you don't, then definitely do it so that you can start to learn what's going on in your bank account.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, do you have any other final words of encouragement, recommendation, tips, tricks for the audience?
I would say I have two things that I want to say for a data audience. The first one is, and I know this term is out there, but human-centered design. And when I was doing most of my report building, I wasn't really aware of this concept, and I really wish I had been. Have your data move around your people. Don't try to move your people around your data. And I had this one just gut-wrenching experience where I built this dashboard for a clinic operations, and I showed it to them, and they said, "This is amazing. We love this dashboard. This is going to be great." It had like 10 different dashboard pages on it. And I said, "Great. Like, I'm a hero. Good. I've done this," and they're very happy. And maybe like 6 months later, I was just in a casual conversation with one of the users for that dashboard. I said, "Hey, is the dashboard still working for you?" He said, "Yeah, really, it's working really well." And I said, maybe just for my own research, like, what do you like about it? Or what do you use most? And what do you not use? And the answer I got was, actually, I only used the 10th page, but I use it all the time. And I was like, the 10th page was something I threw in at the end. Like, I almost didn't even have it in there. Right. And, she didn't know that, but I went, wow, I accidentally gave them one thing that they're using, and I ran the risk of giving them 100% of nothing. Right. And I realized that because I knew the data, I took for granted how they wanted to see it and how it was going to be useful for them. And what I gave them was what I thought, or what I assumed they should be looking at in the way I assumed they should be looking at it. Now, I'm not wrong, but what I made was a dashboard for me. Yeah. What I didn't make was a dashboard for them. And where I've learned over the years is, in my eagerness to, and everybody, data person's going to be nodding along with this, there's an eagerness to please, right? And I just couldn't wait to get it out. And the time between having the data modeled and having the dashboard output should have been slower, more consultative, and made sure that I was matching not just their preferential views, but matching their data literacy levels. If you build something that's this complicated and what your audience can understand is this complicated, well, then you should have built it this complicated, because reports that people can't understand are not reports. They're just pictures, right? So I'd say that to say that I also want to give a plug to Gilbert Eichenblum's book, People Skills for Analytical Thinkers, because that's a huge part of this. And I do, I've done some teaching here and there over the years. And what I try to tell people is whatever you're doing, I think everybody's in sales, whether you like it or not. If you're in an interview, you're selling yourself. If you are, selling a product, you're selling a product. That one's easy. But if you're a data analyst making something, you actually have to sell your users on using it. Mm-hmm. And you can either build it without them and try to sell them on using it, or you can build it with them, and it's going to be a lot easier to sell them on using it because they helped you build it in a way that they basically told you, if you build it this way, I'll buy it. Yeah. But bring in your own expertise. So yeah, what I would tell anybody out there is try to move your data around the people, not the other way around.
That's great advice. Well, thank you so much, Tristan, for coming on the show and sharing all of your wonderful stories. I enjoyed it. I hope the audience will enjoy it. If they have any questions, where can they find and or follow you?
So I'm on LinkedIn exclusively. You can find me by name, or follow the hashtag Quality Improvement Dad, and get a little fun tidbits for what's going on in my house.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And as always, folks, happy learning.